Hey everyone, it's Katie Without a Crystal Ball from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome. Hi, it's Sunday afternoon. Welcome. How are you doing? I hope you guys are having a really great afternoon, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, whatever's going on. So many of you are in different places, and I'm just here for the show. Okay, so a couple of you have been asking so much for some new information. Okay, you've been wanting to have all kinds of details, tea, looking for tea. And one of the things that I do on this channel, obviously, is I try to be as like conscientious as possible about the information that I'm providing, and I try to verify information, especially if people come to me and say that they know someone and they have like information to give me. And I had, after I did a couple stories about Myka, a lot of people were reaching out to me that knew her from before they became famous. And the biggest thing that they said was like, you've gotten so many of these details right, so I feel comfortable telling you these things. And so three separate people from her life came forward and told me all kinds of stuff. And I was going to be like, okay, do I share it or do I not share it? And then I thought, you know what? I will just share it because these people obviously have all had the same story. They all have the same. And I have to, you have to remember, like, in this world, first off, people can say a lot of things, right? So you can, in this world, when someone becomes a public figure, people can often come out of the woodwork and make lies up, right? And they can say things just to piss people off, or they could be someone from their life that they didn't actually like or had a very like minimal relationship with them. But in this case, I felt like it didn't really matter too much in that respect because they all had the same story. And not only that, what we're looking at here is a lot more complicated and a lot more serious than I really think even people thought. Like, I think there's been this like tagline of like this narrative, if you will, of like, she did this for fame, right? Well, people from her life before she became like famous or YouTube famous, it's all kind of relative in what you want to consider famous at this point. But people that knew her before said that this was a long time in the making and she was like set to become famous. And they brought up a lot of things that I was like, whoa. So let me just tell you, I got this message and I'm going to read it to you. And these are actually some old photos of her. I'll just like, it's funny because these are some old like photos from her. I'll just like let this go kind of on a slideshow so you can see it. It's interesting because this is her old Instagram. She's changed quite a bit since she's become famous, but apparently this is what happens. She actually has her daughter with another man. She got pregnant with him, and then she met James not long after. They actually met online. James is from Florida. She's from Ohio. And when they got together, they decided to almost like move in together almost immediately. And so James apparently, according to this person, moved from from Florida to Indiana. And in Indiana, they bought a house. And this is the house. Let me just show you before I even get into, well, I'll show you the house information in a minute. But here is what the neighbor said to me. She said, I've been watching all of your videos about the Stauffer family, and you're doing a really good job of telling their story. I don't mind if you share any of this as long as you don't use my name, please. I used to be their neighbor when they lived in Indianapolis. You have been spot on about everything. I remember my husband would always comment on how much James did and how little Myka did. She ran the guy ragged, and when she was a nurse at one of the local hospitals, which didn't last long, she would make him take her to and from work because she just didn't flat out want to drive. Once she quit or got fired, she started dumpster diving at stores near us like Ulta and Staples. Their garage was full of stolen goods that they would then sell for profit on Craigslist, which was super fun for neighbors to have random people constantly parking in the street. One time we watched as one person stayed outside and robbed their unlocked car in the driveway. So that made us feel super safe. She would also go to Goodwill stores in the affluent parts of the city, purchase name brand items, and then sell them for a tiny profit on eBay. Then she would also take advantage of our elderly neighbors we had and rope them into watching their kids for free so that they could have date nights. I've never seen anyone so impulsive about everything that they did. It was literally impossible to keep up with their next scheme. Regarding Huxley, I told my close friend about the situation as it unfolded. One of those friends sent me a link to their story on parents.com and asked if we were the old neighbors, because she remembered me talking about how I felt this family was adopting in order to get YouTube famous. She was shocked to hear that she was correct, and frankly, so was I. What are the odds of that? Anyway, now that I know I wasn't crazy, that I must have had rather good instincts about this. So she then shared like a photo of the home. So let me just show you where they actually lived prior to all of this going down. So they lived in a house in Indiana, and they purchased this home. You might recognize parts of it from if you are a subscriber. The house is actually nothing to like. It's a cute home, but it's obviously, and you can see the R there for Radley. You can see all of the toys. A lot of this looks like if you remember their older videos. So the house actually, when looking at it, it's 2,200 square feet. If you remember, once they actually adopted Huxley, they moved into another home before they purchased their McMansion, which has 5,700 square feet. So they moved from like a 2,300 square feet home in Indianapolis to another home in Ohio, and then to a home in Dublin, Ohio. Now, in Ohio, their house is $670,000. It has 5,700 square feet, and their annual taxes are $14,000 a year in Ohio. Now, the house they owned in Indiana before they became YouTube famous was 2,300 square feet, around that. It had 2 full baths, 2 full bedrooms. It had 7 rooms. It had an eating area, a dining area. It had laundry. They had, it had 2,364 square feet, basically. And then they had an upper and an upstairs and a downstairs. So it wasn't like an enormous home, but it was like a decent sized house. And they sold that house in 2016 and moved to Ohio. They sold that house in 2016 for $205,000. They purchased another home in Ohio, and then in Ohio in 2018 they sold that house for $277,000. So prior to this Huxley stuff, they did not have like a ton of money, but her neighbor said that he was working as a lead engineer at a job, and he was making good enough money to be able to support them and allow Myka to stay at home. She worked briefly as a nurse in Ohio. She got in trouble for assaulting a pregnant coworker. She was later left Ohio. She did not renew her nursing license in Ohio. They moved to Indiana. In Indiana, she actually got registered as a nurse there, and she only worked in Indiana as a nurse for a very short time, apparently at a nursing home. And according to the neighbor, this had absolutely not a good reputation, the place where she worked. And people in the neighborhood were convinced that she was fired, even though she said she quit. They said they thought she was fired. So after that, that's just a little rundown. The neighbor continued. Let me just pull up these photos again so you have something to look at. Okay. So the neighbor continued, and I asked, how well she knew her. And she said, I tried to get her to know her, but they really kept to themselves a lot. We were neighborly, as in we talked outside on occasion, and our kids would play together sometimes. And she and I hung out a few times together with our kids and went to the zoo. And we texted even after they moved. I don't feel like I ever really knew her, as she was not an easy person to talk to, whereas I'm the exact opposite. And she didn't have any friends that I knew of until after YouTube started. Then she would mention girlfriends that she had met through there, and they were other YouTubers. I feel awful for all of them, to be honest. I don't wish any ill will on them, but I have to say I question their motives for adopting from the beginning. I just hope that the situation stops them from making rash decisions in the future, especially the ones that affect another person's life. Watching their rise to fame and chasing the almighty dollar from the beginning until now has been interesting, to say the least. So then I said, what made you question her motives about the adoption? And then I said, I'm truly curious because you are the third person that's told me this, because two other people from her life has told me the exact same thing. And so this is what she said. I think it's because at the time she decided to adopt, she was friending another adoptive YouTube mom, other moms like Alex Conagry, or I don't even know. Is she from The Nest? I don't know. Alex Conagry. And saw the following that they had. Both her and her husband had explicitly told us prior to deciding to adopt that their plans was to become YouTube famous and have their sole income be from that. When they announced their plans to adopt, she credited it to God leading the way. They had never shown any signs of being religious. So the neighbor says that she literally is lying about being a Christian. They never went to church. She wasn't religious. And she looked at what these other religious moms were doing with adoption and sort of modeled what they were doing. So she continued and said, they had never shown any signs of being religious, never went to church, which I'm not saying makes one religious at all, but it all seems sketchy and very much like a scheme to turn themselves into a certain type of family to gain an audience. Their life prior to adoption was dull, and it seemed like they needed that one thing to make them noticed. They very often changed their minds about things, important things in life. We watched them purchase various dogs and rehome them. We saw them be raw vegan, then eat meat, then plant-based, as if they were trying out different forms or lifestyles purely to see which audience they could capture the most. And of course, as most people are talking about, the rush to adoption was odd. They had other children already, so it wasn't a matter of trying to fill a void. I disliked the videos they made about Huxley, teasing details about him and even his pictures, which they turned into a fundraiser. They made his picture into a puzzle and asked people to purchase pieces for quite a bit of money, if I recall. And each day they would assemble the puzzle based on the amount of donations. Who does that? Not to mention, her husband worked at the same company as my brother-in-law, and we knew he was making bank. Plus, they gave him a $10,000 stipend for adoption. There was just no need for that type of fundraising for the adoption, in my opinion, except to gain followers and fame. They were not in debt other than their mortgage, so I felt like they were unwilling to spend their own money for the sake of adopting and rather saw it as a business opportunity. Not to mention, I'm sure they wrote off the entire trip to China on their taxes since they took the whole family and filmed all of it. Now, these are her allegations about the taxes. I'm not going to make any claims about that. This is what she said. And then she said, I have a cousin with special needs who was adopted from the Philippines, and I remember even as a child, the entire experience was extremely personal and private. We as cousins were not allowed to meet him for months after he was in the US and he was in the new family. Yet they blasted this poor kid all over the internet before he was ever legally adopted, and he will never get that part of his life back, which is something I pointed out, was that she was giving a ton of information about him way before they were ever the legal guardians of him, which is one of the things that I think is really scary, considering that she had no legal rights to share that, yet was divulging all of his personal medical information. So then I said, the next question I asked her was, let's see. I asked her specifically, did she tell you that she wanted another child? Had she ever brought up adoption in the past? And she said, nope. And in fact, after they had their third child, Radley, I remember her saying that she was done having kids. Shortly after that, she and her husband did a Q&A about wanting to have 6 to 10 children, but never mentioned adoption. So she said that she made friends with all of these people on YouTube who were like Christian vloggers, and they were into adoption, and they had really large families. And so she decided that she was going to become like this Christian vlogger and have a lot of kids because she saw the niche and the market in order to do this. Now, this is again all of her neighbors' opinions. And I said, so did you know about their adoption plans prior to starting the YouTube stuff? And she said, no, that was never a thing until they had been vlogging as a family for a while. And I said, so she becomes friends with adoption families, and then she wants to adopt. And she said, yes, exactly. And I said, her discussions around faith seem superficial. Was that another lie? And she said, like I said, they never once went to church in the 3+ years I lived by them. They never prayed or spoke to God. And when she mentioned God in one of her videos, I was taken aback as I knew it was disingenuous. You can tell how uncomfortable she is whenever she tries to mention God or talk about religious things. And then I said, like, this seems so crazy. And she said it really felt at the time like she was emulating these other YouTube adoption moms. And having known her personally, it made me uncomfortable. She was always a very over-the-top fake person. And I said, well, what do you mean by fake? And then I also said, like, what kind of money was her husband making? And she said, he was some kind of lead engineer. I can't speak to how much he was making, but more than enough to have a stay-at-home wife in a modest home in Indiana where the cost of living was very low. And then she described why she thought she was fake. And she said she just seemed to change her personality based on whoever she was talking to. If we were in public, she enjoyed dressing to be noticed by men and would seemingly search around to see who was checking her out. And then she said, but at home, she would act over the top sweet as pie to certain people and say weird phrases like, thank you so kindly, very loudly in a super loud voice after her kids would say, get candy while trick-or-treating. And she said that all of the like stuff, and then I asked her about homeschooling. So that was the other thing. Like, so she was going to be the Christian mom that adopted, and then she was also going to be a homeschool mom. And one of the things that came up recently was that her followers had noticed that back in December, they abruptly placed the kids in public school. And she said that her oldest daughter was actually in public preschool before all of this happened. And I said, well, was homeschooling an idea before YouTube? Like, were they doing that? And she said, no, homeschooling was not pre-YouTube. And I asked another friend and I said, was homeschooling for YouTube? And she said, they never homeschooled until YouTube. Again, emulating these like people that were online or these other like Christian moms. And I said, so like, she said, I do think she decided to do that because her oldest daughter had a different dad and she spent summers with him. So maybe she felt like she was getting less time and decided to homeschool. And so then I said, I asked her about James. So one of the things that one of her former friends or acquaintances, a coworker of James's wife, told me in a message that James was constantly doing everything for the kids and that he was the one that was taking care of them, even though he worked full time. And so I asked her, like, how involved is she with the kids? Like, one of her friends told me that this was how it was. And she said James did everything all of the time. The grocery shopping, most of the cooking, all the outdoor work, although that was never done very well. He was always outside with the kids on nice days when he wasn't working. He would go to work super early, like 4 a.m., and had almost an hour commute just so he could get home earlier and take care of the kids. She was always concerned and needing to get out by herself, like to Target or to get her hair done, or maybe and made a really big deal out of it. But I never once saw James get time to himself. And then I said, well, why did they move back to Ohio? So they moved to Indiana and then they moved back to Ohio, and they were only there for a few years. And so she said, from what I know, James is from Florida and Myka is from Ohio. They were both living in these places before they met online. This was shortly after she had her first daughter and broke off her engagement with her first baby daddy. She told me that he was a really nice guy, they never really had any issues, but she just didn't feel they were right for each other. She and James met online and quickly decided to move in together. So he found a job in Indiana as close to Ohio as he could get at the time, and then bought the house I sent to you. I think at that point, Myka had an estranged relationship with her family, but I don't really know. But she said that when she started having more kids, I think she started to have a better relationship with her family. And she told me that they were moving back to Ohio to be near her family to have help with the kids because she hadn't had much luck with local babysitters. And I'm pretty sure she had worn out the elderly neighbors as they always tried to mooch off free date nights for childcare. So apparently, every single week they were utilizing their neighbors in order to watch the kids, and the neighbors got tired of watching them. So crazy, right? And then I think I ended it up by asking her, I said, does she act differently in real life versus online? Because if you see the older clips of Myka, you notice that she was, in those videos, like has a different voice. And she said yes and no. I feel like she had multiple personalities. One was super goofy, one was super serious, and one was more chill. The voice she uses in the videos is not her everyday talking voice. So this matched what another one of her former colleagues or her husband. So I had a couple more people come out. All of them had connections to James and her. All of them said that Myka was exaggerated. Myka was like, they would constantly catch her in lies. She exaggerated her work experience as a nurse. She got fired or had this big incident at her work where she assaulted one of her coworkers and then like basically stopped working there. And that they impulsively made a lot of decisions. They studied the algorithm a lot on YouTube to figure out exactly what they were doing, which is why they see a lot of those clickbait. One of the women said the reason why you see all of those when she was pregnant was because they like favor, like in the algorithm, you'll get a lot of clicks if you have a pregnant belly and you talk about your pregnancy. And then they talked about how they knew that they were getting lots of clicks about Huxley, so then they would clickbait the Huxley name and then have barely anything in about Huxley just to get clicks. All of these were the opinions of these people, so I can't, again, say, okay, this is exactly what it is. But I feel like when you have all of these different people basically saying, I knew Myka, Myka doesn't like to tell the truth, Myka is very impulsive, Myka never wanted to adopt until she met these people on YouTube, Myka lied about being a Christian, Myka wasn't religious, Myka didn't care about homeschooling until she was on YouTube. Like, they said that she basically crafted this image she wanted because of what worked in the algorithm. So that's what your messages are definitely going through, Claire. So that's what the neighbor had to say. Obviously, I'm still like, where the hell is Huxley? And I feel like that could be another video for another day. So there's been some speculation about Huxley being sort of in the rehoming world, which is sort of this illegal way of getting rid of a child that you have adopted, basically where you go private placement, where you basically just hand over the parental rights to somebody else and allow them to adopt. From my understanding and through people that have messaged me, the person that is adopting them is in the same area, apparently. But again, I mean, this was her excuse for doing it. We never just give up on a child with special needs. This is a personal matter to Hux. It had nothing to do with he just had autism. Multiple scary things happened inside the home towards our other children. And if these events happened with one of my biological kids, after all that help and after the behaviors we witnessed, sadly, we would have no other choice than to seek help and get their needs met. Huxley wanted this decision 100%. We saw that in family time with other people. He constantly chose them and signed and showed tons of emotion to show us and let us know he wanted us. Huxley never had a say in his adoption, and no one needed more help, and he also wanted this, and we know that 100%. Okay, first off, he's 4, and he's a 4-year-old with a cognitive disability, which she has said that he has a low IQ, and he's developmentally, according to them, around 1.5 years. He might have had some bonding issues. And they did say, the people that know him said that James did do most of the caring for Huxley. And Myka rarely, and James took him to all of his doctor's appointments. So it could have just been that they did this for the show, and then they get the kid, and the kid has a lot more issues than they thought. And then it's super expensive, and they're making all kinds of money, and they want to buy all these expensive things. But then Huxley has all of these needs. And the one question that remains completely in the back of my mind is, what doctor would actually say you need to place your kid with someone else? Like, literally, I've never heard that happen. I've never heard a doctor say that you should give up custody of your child. I want to know who that doctor is, and I want them to be fired, because no doctor would ever say that. She's getting a ton of backlash in the adoption world as well for the way that she's portraying this. Adoptees are really outraged by the way that she is like handling all of this. Not only that, but I've received so many messages from mothers and fathers who have done international adoption who are absolutely outraged and said, well, yes, there are challenges in these situations. The way that they've handled this is completely inappropriate, and it makes international adoption, look so bad. They also said a lot of people were worried that because of her very nonchalant, like, I'm rehoming him, now people are worried that China could find out about this and make changes and make it even more challenging. And they said, one of the women said that they are currently going through the process in China, and said it's incredibly difficult, and it should be. And so she can't understand how they were able to get through all of these hoops in order to get Huxley and then just ditch him. So that's the tea. Yes, adoption is always a challenge. All right, you guys, so that's my tea, the news, the scoop on Myka. I'll be doing some more deeper dives into the rehoming aspect of this, because that is a really sketchy part of this whole story. And it has a humongous black market, and it's essentially like, if she does it without an agency involved, there can be like, it's essentially human trafficking in a way. And because they didn't go through the state, there's a lot of questions about like how well the family that they've been placed with, how well they're looked at, like how the background checks. They don't do background checks. If she hand selected them, and that's the other concern that some of these people have that have come from the past, is that they're concerned that given Myka's judgment on everything that she does in life, like, why should they trust her judgment now as it relates to finding a new parent for Huxley? Because she apparently, according to these people, makes terrible choices. So that's where we're at for now. I will be back tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to do a more uploaded, polished video for you guys, but I wanted to make sure to give you a little bit of insight today. If you guys have comments, questions, or concerns, please leave me some comments, as well as if you know someone who knows her, or you have experience with adoption, or are in that China like adoption international page. If you have any insight, make sure you reach out to me. I'm always open to hearing about your experiences. If you know Myka, feel free to contact me. As with this neighbor, I kept her identity confidential, so I will obviously respect anyone's confidentiality if they have insight that they'd like to share. But I think the biggest thing that all of us should be still concerned about is, where is Huxley? How did this adoption take place? And why hasn't there been anything with Child Protective Services? What about the other kids? Like, how is there not any legal ramifications for what they've done? There's also the petition on change.org, which has like 60 or 70,000 like signatures, which I don't know if that will do anything. You can continue to reach out to Team YouTube if you really want to get her stuff off of if you really want to get her stuff off of YouTube, you should Twitter them at Team YouTube and tell them about her and reach out and scream and shout. Also, Jim Stauffer is not his page is still like he made a the day they made the announcement to go and actually like tell you guys what happened to Huxley, he went ahead and formed an LLC in his company Fox Cleaning. So his Stauffer Garage and Fox Cleaning is seemingly going to be the direction they're going to go. So you might want to find out who his sponsors are and reach out to them, because Myka's getting a lot of flack, and I don't feel like we should be letting James off the hook here, because if what all of these people from their past are saying is true, this is absolutely despicable, and it completely comes into this whole, what protections are there for kids on YouTube? How do we protect anyone from using kids for content and using kids for clout and like putting another kid in this position? All of these people have said Huxley did not have a choice here, and he was used. So that's their opinion. I want to know what your thoughts are. No, so Chris Cat says the adoption agency, they had nothing to do with the transfer of Huxley. That's not true. The CPS said they had nothing to do with it. So the state of Ohio, who would be the foster care system, the state facility for Ohio that handles adoptions for her county, they told BuzzFeed that they were not a part of the adoption. That does not mean she didn't use a private adoption agency. No agency commented about what happened here. Only the state of Ohio said Huxley's not in our custody, and Huxley's was never like surrendered to the state. All right, you guys, that's all I have for now. Bye.